On the 8th of November 2025, the Rotary Club of Central Port of Spain hosted its annual Model United Nations event, a youth development and education program that introduces secondary school students to the world of international diplomacy and its role in multilateral relations and conflict resolution. That edition of the Trinidad and Tobago Model UN exercise marked 25 years of not just the event, but also its evolution as the largest Model UN program in the English-speaking Caribbean. Her Excellency Christine Kangaloo, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, began her feature address at the opening ceremony by tackling the concept of the Model UN program.
To model means to follow or to imitate. And one of the ideas behind the hosting of this Model United Nations program is to have its participants follow or imitate the workings of the United Nations. And so one of the questions which participants in the program need to ask themselves is, what exactly is it that I'm following or imitating as I participate in this program?
Model UN programs use simulations and role-playing to introduce young people to the work of the UN in facilitating global diplomacy. These techniques serve to increase not only participants' awareness of global issues, but also their capacity to research, discuss, and debate these issues. This episode of the Build Back Better Caribbean podcast explores how the program in Trinidad and Tobago has been designed to achieve these goals. Raisa Belcon is the head trainer for the 2025 Model UN exercise.
I never thought I would be so comfortable with public speaking and just training students on this grand scale. I knew I always wanted to teach, but to that level, it's a bit different. And, you find yourself and you find a deeper meaning to your purpose when you do Model UN.
Raisa's Model UN journey began as part of the 2016 cohort of Model UN Trinidad and Tobago delegates. It was an experience that transformed her from a reserved Form 6 student who avoided public speaking to an empowered adult, confident in her capacity to not just understand global issues, but also effect change.
I've always been interested in educating younger persons. And being able to interact with persons around my age group and then go on to become a trainer and interact with the younger ones, it's really showed me the impact that we have as, this generation on how people can interact with others, how we can teach them how to be, a bit more involved in community work, and also just to be more aware of global issues. And I think a lot of them don't realize how much they have a role to play when it comes to global issues, especially. So the topics that we cover in the Model UN, it really opens up their mind and makes them more willing to be involved and willing to be around the conversations that really would have an impact on them in the next 10 years. Same way I would have been not as aware 10 years ago, I'm more aware now.
The Model UN program focuses on simulating UN member states' debate, negotiation, and decision-making processes for an item on the General Assembly's agenda. Students are prepared for the simulation through a series of training sessions designed to develop their research, public speaking, conflict resolution, and teamwork skills. For 7 weeks, Model UN trainers guide students through the transformative process of becoming General Assembly committee members or delegates for their respective UN member states. Students work together in randomly selected pairs to learn as much as possible about the member state they've been assigned in order to ably represent and debate their positions within the context of the simulation. The countries are arranged into regional blocks, with a Model UN trainer or pair of trainers assigned to each block. Raisa explains how this facilitates the training process.
Yeah, so it follows the UN geographical subcategories of countries. So we have Africa and the Middle East, we have Latin American countries and the Caribbean, and then we also have Europe, which covers Western and Eastern Europe, and then we also have the Asia Pacific and Oceanic countries. So that's 4 blocks that we have. And the trainers usually they would have been a representative of a country back then within that block when they were delegates. But this year we switched it up when we had senior and junior trainers. But I made sure that I'm assigning them that at least one of them would have been assigned to a country within that specific block. Because of that familiarity, they're able to impart that knowledge on the delegates themselves. And the seniors, of course, they would have been there for years and years, seeing how different blocks would, react to different topics and all of that. So they're able to bounce off of ideas of each other and be able to improve each other's performance. And the blocks themselves, they become very close. They're still chatting away in the WhatsApp group chats. So they're still very focused on what their like individual countries would have responded to with things that are currently going on. And being able to divide them into 4 blocks makes it easier on us as well, because this year's 200 students. And, you have to make sure that you have enough manpower to really navigate working with 50 something students in a block. And I think that they did very, very well. In previous years, you would have had 100 students, or about 20 in each block or so. And, one trainer, so 20 students isn't that bad, but they still would have been from that block when they were delegates, and they're more aware of the things that are required of those countries to, be able to fully participate and make the debate more engaging and exciting.
Model UN trainers must connect with a very specific target audience and deliver to it very complex information. The Model UN Trinidad and Tobago training design incorporates past student delegates who completed the program a year or 2 earlier as trainers and senior trainers. Raisa explains how this past participant to trainer pipeline supports the design and delivery of the training.
All right, so I'm not sure if our situation is unique to Trinidad in terms of having past delegates return. But for us especially, it's good to have the most recent persons, partaking, because they would have the fresher understanding of what it takes to be a delegate. And they're also closer in age to the new ones that are coming along. So they're able to relate to them more, communicate a little better than probably those of us who've been here for 4 or 5 years would be able to. And especially coming out of the pandemic, lots of students would have been going to school online, and their communication style will be very different. So those who are trainers closer to their age group who would have also had to go to school online, they're able to assist us who were here, from years before, be able to construct the training in a different way for them to understand, or maybe give them material that's more attuned to their way of thinking and learning. And for us, it's really, really beneficial to have those students there just to make sure that we have a closer grip on what's really affecting the younger persons. Because as someone who's been there for a quite longer time, I may not be able to understand the language that they may need to learn better. Or maybe someone who's been there for 5 years, they may not know something that person who's been there for 2 years will know to say, okay, this is how this generation may be able to learn better, or this is how this generation will interpret what you're saying. So it's beneficial for us to make sure to keep that close group of students, just so that we don't lose track or don't lose sight of what we're really trying to do, which is to impact the younger ones.
In order to share the Model UN knowledge and best practices it has developed over the past 25 years to the wider Caribbean, the Rotary Club of Central Port of Spain regularly invites regional students to participate in the Trinidad and Tobago training and simulation events. These invitations are issued within the Rotary's Southern Caribbean district, which includes Rotary clubs in 17 English, French, and Dutch-speaking Caribbean countries and territories. For Raisa and her team, educational and geographical diversity must therefore inform the process of the training design. They incorporate all the resources at their disposal to ensure clarity and precision as they deliver each year's training. Their primary goal? The creation of an inclusive space, whether virtually or in person, in which all students can fully engage with each other and the material.
So I will always meet with the co-trainers and we decide, okay, this was the challenge we had in the previous year. How can we make sure it's addressed this year for the new students coming in? And every week we kind of review what would have stood out to us that could be fixed or could be improved. And the first week is always introductions, because you don't want to just, pile a whole bunch of work and assignments on them one time. So we introduce them to the trainers, the general committee, we let them introduce themselves. And it's very admirable to see how quickly they warm up, not just to us, but to their peers. Because there's so much different schools. We have schools from Matura, we have Tranquil Government, secondary, and schools that would not really be able to take part, maybe because they don't know about the program, or it's just too far from them to actually come to a training in UE St. Augustine or a time we had in Costard and Central. So it's really, the focus is to just make sure they're all comfortable. And not just that, when we have different topics, like the heavy topics, if it's migration, if it's terrorism, you make sure it's delivered to them in a way that they're not afraid of, participating, but they're more actually open to learning and contributing on behalf of their member state that they would have selected, randomly. And it takes them by surprise for a bit, but they get accustomed like within the third week or so. And then from there, it's hard to get them to stop participating and, to relax a bit. But it's fun to see that change coming from them, especially leading up to the final debates. It's something that makes us as trainers, really feel that they're able to listen to us, they're able to understand us, especially from the regional delegate side, who, that's our greatest fear sometimes, that they may not fully grasp what's going on, but they do pick up, and sometimes they're able to help the local ones, be able to write their speeches and be able to combat their fears of public speaking. So it's a really, really good melting pot of the locals and regionals being able to contribute to the Model UN.
TKL Archer's Model UN journey began in 2020, but he didn't get the chance to debate then, as activities were interrupted by the COVID-19 lockdown in Trinidad and Tobago. He was invited to participate in the next staging of the event, which was eventually held in 2022. In 2024, he became a trainer for the delegates in the Americas bloc, and this year he returned as a senior trainer assigned to prep the delegates of the African and Middle East bloc of countries. During an impromptu conversation with UNIC Caribbean on the margins of Model UN 2025, TKL mentioned that teaching students to become critical consumers of information, to differentiate between what he calls noise and facts, is an important part of his process.
The first thing I do is that I tell them, if you believe you know something, that is the beginning of knowing nothing at all. That's my first starting point. Secondly, I would have told them that while it's important to stay up to date with the news, you have to hear what they're saying, but listen to what is not being said. So, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, crime takes the majority of the headlines. It's the core focus, right? But if you look beyond the headlines and you go into UN sources, you go into actual articles published by the government, you understand that, yes, crime might be the main headline, and the news would report what's happening always after the fact, but not much discussion on how we got here in the first place. So the next time you hear a murder happen, ask yourself this: how does this link back to our recent history? Where have we gone left? Where have we gone right? And then your perspective on news changes. The third thing I encourage them to do is to have a healthy amount of skepticism. Do not take anything at face value. Just because someone says something and it gets an emotional reaction out of you, you need to learn to shut it off. And you need to pay attention to what is. Because there's a difference between what is and what ought to be. And you don't want to get caught in the, what's what I'm looking for? The theatrics of presentations. Because it might be a nice show, but it can just be a whole lot of nothing of substance. So don't be intimidated if everyone around you seems well spoken. Because yes, you might compare yourselves to them, but you need to ask yourself this: what is it they're actually trying to say? how effective really are they getting it across, and what are they basing this out of?
As head trainer, Ricer confirms that the strengthening of critical thinking is prioritized during the training so that students recognize and avoid some of the pitfalls inherent in the use of online tools for research.
On the first day, actually, every week we tell them the same thing, If you're going to research on your country, find a source from within your country. And Wikipedia, unfortunately, is not your best friend. So, we tell them about these sites that use .org or .gov, making sure that whatever it is they're researching and using as evidence of their statements, that is the source that they're using. And, this year especially, you had lots of propaganda and all that on websites and stuff. So we make sure to educate them on how to use their own discernment when researching. Is it that one website will only promote one side of a story and the other side is somewhere you have to dig a little deeper? So, you have to present your findings in a way that persons won't be raising an eyebrow and saying, but where are you finding this, And as much as they want to use like BBC and CNN, they also have to understand, and we explain to them, and sometimes there's a bias. So, if you really want to get down into the nitty-gritty, you have to find out where are these countries' ministries, what are they doing, what are their websites, what are they putting out statements on different things that are happening, and how best can you really compile that information and make it, understandable enough for your peers to see that you're actually doing your research and the research is valid. Another thing that we tell them about is the quality of the research and the timeliness of it. So sometimes people, might want to use information from 2010, but in 2023, a whole new bunch of research came on the same topic. So we make sure to advise them to look back at the historical data and see what major changes would have happened, especially with different laws and policies, because sometimes they get called out by their other delegates and they say, well, this policy was enacted in 2017. What have you done with it so far? There's no updates or anything. So they now are able to see, well, this was updated in the past couple of months, and they're able to list the differences or the improvements or challenges. And that really also helps with their general research skills, because lots of them are in Form 6 and they're doing SBAs and all of that. So they are able to learn from MUN how to research, how to apply to their school life, and they're able to just create better documents by themselves without us having to be like, don't use Wikipedia, don't use CNN. And they're able to call it out on their own after a while, and they're able to understand that this language isn't from a .gov site or a .org site. This sounds like just an Al Jazeera website video or something. So that is a major part of the training that I would say. And Tikal is absolutely right. You have to tell them in a way, don't just believe everything you hear on a video or an Instagram reel or something. You have to research for yourself and be able to say, this makes sense.
The culmination of the Model UN experience for participants is the debate of a resolution crafted by the organizing team based on that year's selected theme. The event mirrors the general debate held annually at the beginning of the UN General Assembly session in the use of language, rules of procedure, and even national dress worn by students as member state delegates debating on behalf of their respective countries. For 2025, peace and human rights was the theme for the Model UN discussions and debate. Ricer describes her team's approach to preparing students to navigate and apply the concepts and ideas surrounding this theme.
What we try to do, we do something called the mock debates. So these are like mini simulations of the United Nations General Assembly. And picking the topics for them to do a mock debate on is sometimes one of the hardest things to do, especially, as you said, a topic as broad as peace and human rights. So we make sure that they understand what human rights entails. And an example of one of the training sessions you have done would have been rights of the child in the digital environment, especially as, there's lots of talk about the safety of children on social media like TikTok and Instagram and all of that. So with that, they're able to look a little deeper into what rights do children have and how does that further relate to human rights. And for a lot of them, persons who have represented Australia, they would have realized that there's actually laws being put into place to restrict students, well, younger persons from having access to social media. And that, of course, raises the other question: what type of rights would that infringe upon in another country? So it's not just going to be human rights is human rights. Human rights includes rights of the child, rights of women and girls, rights of migrants, and that also covers other mock debate topics that we choose to do. And based on how they perform with, let's say, the mock debate on children's rights, we'll go on then into women's rights because, it directly relates. And they are able to pick up on that quickly enough for us to say, okay, they're more than prepared now for the final debates, which we actually covered the prevention of genocide, because that covers all human rights, not just rights of the child and women, but persons who may be fleeing from conflicts. So it's really a five-fold type of training where they're just picking up on certain things from the first one and being able to apply it to the other. And we also take notes of what it is they're thinking of and what it is they're actually researching to be able to apply it to another training session. And that is always an eye-opener for us.
For all students turned delegates, the Model UN experience is an immersive 7-week hands-on learning journey into the work of the United Nations and an exploration of the potential of debate and diplomacy for understanding complex global issues. For many, the inclusive and collaborative dynamic facilitated by the Model UN program often results in long-lasting connection and camaraderie.
We do maintain communication. The WhatsApp group chats have been, I think, a very, very big push with where that is concerned, because there are group chats from 2021 that are still active. People still message, they send information, job opportunities, volunteer opportunities. There's been students who see each other at, Global Beach cleanups and stuff, and they say, oh my gosh, this person is from MUN, and they maintain that contact. So I think in all, that 7 weeks of just being around each other really helps them to want to stay in contact. And because MUN has been such an impactful program, they don't want to let go of those people that they met 1 year ago, 5 years ago. I still keep in contact with my first ever block from MUN.
For 25 years, the Rotary Club of Central Port of Spain has executed the Model UN program in Trinidad and Tobago, extending its reach to include the wider English, French, and Dutch-speaking Caribbean. It is the product of thoughtful design, informed by lessons learned, participant experiences, and intra-regional best practices. This program's success can be measured not simply by its longevity and growth, but by the impact it has had and will continue to have on the lives of Caribbean students.
This podcast is produced and presented by the United Nations Information Center for the Caribbean Area, the voice and the face of the United Nations in the Caribbean. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. For more content in this series, find and follow the UNIC Build Back Better Caribbean podcast on popular streaming platforms.